Inilah buku Strategi Menang Pemilu, Pedoman Kampanye Partai.
en una resolución, en una sesión donde se resuelven juicios electorales desde la sede de este evento. En cuanto a la información y comunicación, vemos que hay un flujo enorme de información que se transmite entre los partidos políticos, las candidaturas, las autoridades electorales y la ciudadanía, que se incrementa de manera exponencial con el uso de las redes sociales. Para ello, pues son las autoridades encargadas de impartir justicia electoral no pueden quedarse al margen de lo que pasa con la utilización de las tecnologías digitales. Es necesario que correspondan a estos avances con una capacitación eficiente que permita el entendimiento de estos procesos. Si bien el uso de las tecnologías de la información y la comunicación ha traído beneficios, como pueden ser la reducción de costos, una comunicación más eficiente, entre otros, su utilización también conlleva riesgos importantes.
To use social media has a lot of advantages, but it's also very risky. They expose a lot of information from a lot of users that they have been using that information in a wrong way. For example, in Cambridge Analytica, challenge the authorities to check that information. Technology can be very, very good, but it's also very delicate to have fake news.
A los panelistas que son precisamente los protagonistas de este ejercicio. Y bueno, pues sin mayor preámbulo, le cedo el uso de la voz al señor Fritz Siregar para que nos haga el favor de
Siregar will interview for 10 minutes to talk about the topic.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ernst, and thank you for the introductions. And I hope now that the translation is already working. And if you still have the difficulties with the translation, please contact the committee. Justice Monica Soto, that is already joined with us this afternoon, and also our friends that come from far away to be part of these programs. So I would like to share something with you with regard to the use of the technology for the training. In the beginning, I think Philips is already mentions about like the introduction about the use of the technology for the elections. But I am looking to the way how we use the training, use the technology for the training. As you also experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic, that we have to train our election supervisory. On the other hand, we have also facing with the budget constraints. During 2020, our budget has been cut 40% from the initial budget, and going to 2021, we got cut 30%. And for the 2022, we have 20% budget that we cannot use, just in case that the government need it for the emergency use, so they will take it. So we have facing the constraint of the budget that the government need to put, but we also have the responsibility to train our election supervisory agency from provincial level, district and municipality, district, villages, and also the polling stations. So, of course, as the election supervisory, we ask and we hope that before they do their job, they not only understand the technical skill to filing the report or to submit the allegations or to do the investigation that tomorrow Mrs. Ratna Dewi Petalolo, as the chief of allegation handling for criminal and administrations, she will inform you about the evidence base and also our complaint mechanisms. But also we need to consider how our election supervisory officer from provincial level until the polling stations understand their role. As the next, as the background from you, is it possible to put the slide? So to has the background for you that currently today we have 9,324 staff all over Indonesia, from the national level until also to city and municipality, and we have 2,107 permanent Bawaslu or election supervisory board that already appointed for 5 years from the city, municipality, and province and the national level, and also 800,000 polling station staff that were responsible to do the observation during the elections day. We are also facing about the current wave. The election in Indonesia Election Commissions is starting to use the technology for recapitulations of the vote. They use also considering the idea proposals that 106 countries already implemented election technologies. We consider that as the election supervisory board, that election commissions consider to use technology for counting, recounting, and recapitulation process. But we also have to realize that almost 12,000 of polling stations all over Indonesia doesn't have internet, and almost 8,000 of them doesn't have electricity. So we consider that how we realize with the context that the election commissions use the technology. We do not want to be organizations that against the technology, but we have to also respect the situation conditions that happen in the field that not as ideal what we would like to use. So as the election supervisory board, every election supervisory board, at least they have 3 competence. First, how to violation handling. What they must do when they see or when they get report with regard the violations is from the ethical violation, criminal violations, bribery, discriminations, attacking is part of the criminal or violation handling. Also, they have to see the dispute resolutions, the role of the dispute resolutions when there is a dispute between the political parties and also with the election commissions. They must have that kind of the capability. And also the third capability as to supervisory facilitations. Every election supervisory board must understand that they supervise whether the election commissions do what they must do. So, of course, there is a gap when what we are doing now, there's a gap between the solutions. That's why the application and also the employment recruitment. In the past, because of the technology, of course, we use the YouTube as our channel. Maybe in the past, we use the town hall meeting like this as our basic of the training, also with the module. But with the current situations, we use, in the past, we use Zoom, you use Google Form, we use, if maybe you know, like Kahoot, Socrative, is part of the learning process. We make a lot of YouTube short video to make them understand about the process and also about the recruitment. Like we use certain like similar like Typeform and also creative as the tools for process recruitment. And we see that we need to doing further. We try to use the blended learning diagram. So we use the blended learning, try to combine within the town hall meeting and also use the technology. That's why we already established learning management systems. So now still in the website. So if you come to the website of the Bawaslu, you will find lms learningmanagementsystem.bawaslu.go.id. So you will find the session about the lecturer discussion, case study, simulations, and also you will use the Zoom, WebEx, podcast, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Of course, this is part of the tools. We also use as the WhatsApp group, Telegram, discussions, forum, collaborations, and other application. So the LMS, the learning management systems, is something that in the past is not structured. Every part of the Bawaslu do their own of the training, but since this year we try to use how to use the learning management systems as the fundamental way to do our training, particularly with regard to the incoming election that we will facing in the election 2024, whether the election cycle will start in the 1st of August 2022. So we use this learning management systems as part of the report and analytics, course creation, skill testing, part of the games and the video conferencing, social board forums, also onboarding and also compliance and also the data tracking. And if you look to the roadmap, maybe back again, first back, yeah. The implementation is carrying right now is this part our project that we combine and we try to blended learning for our election supervisory board, that we understand to establish the system. We have the goal for 2022, 2023, and also 2024. It wasn't easy for us, but at least that's what we try to do. Even though it's in the Bawaslu, we already use many systems like online system for court registration. I mean to submit the complaint, also but we focus to this learning management system because this is what we're gonna do for the future, to blended learning between the town hall meetings and also the use of the technology. And of course, the learning management system is still is almost finished with regard the systems, and this is our tools that we can overcome the budget problem that we're gonna face. The second is the number of the election supervisory board that we're gonna have, and also to maintain their capability to the supervisions. Next. So we are expecting that from 2022 until 2024, at least 820,000 election supervisors and also the staff we able to do the training. Next, and for the end, So we do hope that this is my last two slides. So we do hope that with the learning management system that we are creating right now, we can help the self-learning, the independent learning, and also distribution training. Maybe in the past, maybe some of you also have the experience that we distribute the CD, but we're changing that to the distribution of the booklet. We're changing that. Now we are already distribution the login for them through the learning management systems. And next. So we already next. Now we still currently we are still in the website performance. Now we are working with the mobile, so all our election supervisory board is able to access the learning management systems. That we do hope that we can train our election supervisory we able to see their tracking, and also to make sure that all our election supervisory board in the same page. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Fritz Sirgar, por estas palabras, por su disertación. Y a continuación le cedo el uso de la voz al juez Segundo Menéndez, magistrado del Tribunal Supremo de España. Hasta por 10 minutos. Adelante, por favor.
Muchas gracias. Ante todo,
Thank you very much. First of all, good afternoon. I'm very grateful with the organization. You are very kind, and I feel very glad that I'm here to expose some of the issues that we are having. The electoral system, the organization of the organization
es una pirámide de tribunales electorales
is a pyramid between different groups. Call it different groups.
electorales de zona.
There are certain categories just for zones.
En la cabecera, en la localidad donde está la cabeza de partido judicial, por lo tanto, ámbitos territoriales pequeños.
They focus in small lands,
Capitales de provincia.
or for example, in the capitals, also big cities.
Están las juntas electorales
After is electoral bodies.
Están también las juntas electorales
In addition,
autónomas,
also with communities,
propio de cada comunidad.
also in different territories.
La Junta Electoral Central.
And lastly is the center one.
Respectivas decisiones tienen un sistema jerárquico.
They have a system hierarchy.
De tal modo que las decisiones pueden
This way, the decisions between all these different groups, all these different systems,
de un superior grado y en su
have to check their superiors. That's why they need to go all to the center to take decisions. It's very important to mention that in our country, all the decisions based on these groups can take advice from the court. They are not part of the same group.
Y en definitiva la garantía de la tutela
But this guarantees
también en este ámbito
that they can have a good result.
Un determinado problema en el orden jurisdiccional competente, que es el contencioso administrativo. Dicho eso,
saying that,
importa resaltar
it's very important to highlight something that I would like to introduce this morning, but I didn't have the opportunity. I would like to highlight that the confidence of the society in
la honradez de funcionamiento o en el buen funcionamiento de las juntas electorales,
in the good manners they need to trust in the government, and it's very high.
Yo creo que más del 80% de la sociedad española
More than 80% of Spain people
razonabilidad y en la justicia
believe in the government and that they are very accurate with the
El
answers.
mayor problema que tenemos ahora
The major problem that they have in
no es
Spain
tanto el grado de
is
confianza de la
is not
sociedad
about how
en las
accurate
electorales,
is
sino la
the electoral
desconexión
decisions,
de la sociedad por los a lo mejor soy excesivamente
but it's more
pero hay una
about
desconexión por el funcionamiento del sistema democrático
for how the democracy works.
en un gran nivel por acudir a las urnas. Eso supongo que es común.
I think it's pretty common, but it's important to improve in that part so the society will believe more in the government.
Baje decididamente. Dicho eso, me interesa señalar.
For me, it's important to highlight
Estamos de acuerdo.
something that I think we all are agreeing. And probably
Ese principio teórico en el que todos estamos
that principal part of the theory
igual
is
en los distintos países.
very important, but we all think in different ways. What I mean with that is with social media.
Es un valor en sí mismo. Pues es esencial el pluralismo de los medios de comunicación social.
It is very important that we have this social media. It's very important as a part of the information and
Y por lo tanto,
the comments of the society,
de las instituciones democráticas.
and also the good way
Se ha dicho
for
mucho
the communities.
que no hay Estado democrático sin una opinión pública libre y que no hay opinión pública libre sin una comunicación social libre asegurada a través de una estructura plural de medios.
It is very important to have a freedom in the communication. All the society should be free to say what they want,
Tenga acceso al proceso de comunicación
and they should have
que
access
los
to these systems.
potenciales puedan disponer de un contraste de fuentes de opinión y de información. Ha de garantizarse una estructura plural de los medios y la diversidad.
They should guarantee all the systems.
El ordenamiento jurídico, el español, no es discutido, es aceptado, es garantizado por el Tribunal Constitucional, por el Tribunal Supremo, por la generalidad de los órganos judiciales. Por lo tanto,
It's
bienvenidas.
accepted for the society and also for the government and for everyone. So social media is very welcome because that
El
increase
pluralismo de los medios de comunicación social.
a social media, that increase the freedom of the people. So as we say before, social media also increase the risk
Información.
of the fake news.
Mientras que los medios de comunicación social tradicionales
While the traditional social media networking, newspaper, TV, and radio, they have a ethical code and they follow all the rules.
Si la información que van a transmitir es o no veraz,
They really need to see if the information is true.
claridad en las redes sociales.
However, in social media, they lost this track. It's not the same.
Actividades dirigidas a percibir que la información es veraz.
Social media has the perception that
Hay a través de las
information
redes
can be
sociales,
fake.
no de una manera infrecuente, noticias, informaciones falsas, mendaces, tendenciosas, que además, y esto es la característica propia de las redes sociales,
In
pueden
addition,
propagarse desde cualquier lugar, con extraordinaria velocidad, recibidas por un abanico amplísimo de potenciales lectores o, lo que incluso es más grave, dirigidas a grupos seleccionados de personas o de lectores seleccionados por su predisposición a atender esas noticias o a seguirlas. Y la pregunta es, ¿tales riesgos y peligros han de atajarse en los periodos electorales? En ese breve espacio de tiempo en que se desarrolla un proceso
So the
electoral,
question is,
¿han de
this
atajarse?
risk,
A mi modo de ver,
we should
sí.
take this
A mi modo
risk.
de ver, sí. La trascendencia, la enorme trascendencia de la decisión del ciudadano reflejada en el voto, la enorme trascendencia de designar entre proceso electoral y proceso electoral quiénes han de regir los intereses de todo tipo de la colectividad que es llamada a esos procesos electorales, esa enorme trascendencia, creo que debe indicar que los tribunales electorales, entre sus funciones, tienen la de controlar la desinformación, la de controlar de la desinformación. Los tribunales electorales tienen como función primordial preservar los principios de pluralismo político, transparencia, objetividad e igualdad entre las candidaturas electorales. Si eso es su función, creo que un tribunal electoral no puede dejar de prestar atención a esos riesgos y peligros. Ahora, la pregunta, si estuviéramos de acuerdo en esto, la
Now
pregunta
the
es,
question is, if we would agree on this,
¿debe tener un tribunal electoral?
what role should an electoral tribunal have? What role should they have? In this regard,
creo que
I believe
compartiremos el principio
that we probably agree on the principle
de que no cabe una censura previa por
that no
tribunales
previous
electorales.
censorship should be conducted by the electoral tribunal of any kind of
No cabe
information that arrives on electoral
cumpliría
processes.
frontalmente con la garantía de una formación pública libre. Lo que sí debería disponer un tribunal electoral
What an electoral tribunal should ensure
de un conjunto
is
de analistas
to support with a group of analysts
y lo
that are sufficiently capable and multidisciplinary to detect what ideas and information
no ser veraces y además esto es importante
are true, and also
informaciones pueden tener
what ideas and information
para el resultado del proceso electoral.
actually have true impact on the electoral results and
Si ese
processes.
equipo de analistas detectara una información que cumple
If this team of analysts identify information that agree with all of these
el
indicators,
tribunal electoral oiga
the electoral tribunal should
responsable de la información y al responsable
have an
de la red social.
hearing with whoever's in charge of this information.
Esto es obligado. Habrá que arbitrar el sistema idóneo para que esa audiencia pueda hacerse en 24
To this end, we need to ensure a system that truly allows this kind of
¿Qué debe hacer
function.
un tribunal electoral? Debe prohibir
But then what should the electoral tribunal do? Should they prohibit the circulation of this kind of
a
information?
mi modo de ver, no.
In my opinion, this should not be the case.
Confiar en
We
la
should trust
capacidad
in the capacity
de razonar
to reason
del ciudadano.
of the citizen.
Y a mi modo de ver, no, porque
And in my opinion,
que la formación
the
de
important
opinión
thing
pública
is the formation of public opinion.
pública libre
That it should be free
de todo tipo,
and should combine every kind of information.
de la posibilidad de contrastar todo tipo de
And they should have the possibility to contrast any and every kind of information.
¿Y entonces qué puede hacer un tribunal electoral?
So then what should an electoral tribunal do?
Si después de esa
If
información
after this information
de analistas
has been provided to the group of analysts. And after the hearing of the Electoral Tribunal, and if this tribunal declares that this information is not accurate and that it does impact really in the electoral process, sorry.
Idea un poco descabellada. Me atrevo a sugerir que el Tribunal Electoral solo
I dare to suggest that the Electoral Tribunal only should have an informative role,
es decir, de trasladar al cuerpo electoral
meaning that they should provide to the electoral authority
sobre una determinada información
their view
razones que al Tribunal Electoral han conducido a tener ese parecer.
on this piece of information and how it affects elections.
Comunicación social y el respeto a la capacidad de cada elector
The respect of the capacity of each voter
de su raciocinio, de su
to truly reason and analyze the information that they perceive.
electoral solo debería moverse en ese
Hence, the Electoral Tribunal should only consider the veracity of the information.
mucha discusión, pero lo dejo ahí.
This obviously can be discussed much further, but I will leave it here.
Haciendo una breve referencia
So I will make a brief reference
sentencia del Tribunal
to a ruling of the Supreme Court of Spain
del 28 de febrero
from the 28th of February of this year.
en donde se encontró con el
In this ruling, the following problem was analyzed.
Se habían convocado elecciones autonómicas, elecciones en una comunidad.
Autonomous elections had been called
Cataluña,
in Catalonia
elecciones
province
al Parlamento de Cataluña, que se iban
to
a
elect
celebrar
officials to the Parliament of Catalonia.
el 27 de enero, por lo tanto,
The 27th of January,
antes
meaning 28 days before this election,
de las elecciones,
the day of the election, sorry,
publicó en su cuenta de la red
a political party published in their social media account the following tweet referring to the originating population of Madrid, saying the following.
Supone aproximadamente un 0,2%.
This population consists of 1.2% of the voters, and they are in charge of the 94% of the electoral voting power in this election.
Que están dejando la unánime indolencia y complicidad con la delincuencia importada. Solo queda voz. Stop islamización.
Please don't speak.
Al día siguiente,
I'm sorry.
publicar en su cuenta
The following day, they published the next
ese pensamiento.
statement in their Twitter.
La red social Twitter comunicó a Vox
Hence,
que limitaba
Twitter communicated to the political party Vox
de su cuenta. La
that they
respuesta
should
que ofreció fue que Vox había incumplido las llamadas reglas de Twitter,
that they had not complied with the following rulings of Twitter, and that they should do the following.
reglas que prohíben las conductas de incitación al odio.
Their content had inspired hate speech, which is against the community rules of Twitter.
Motivos de su raza, origen étnico, nacionalidad, orientación, etc.
They cannot make any reference to race, any ethnic background.
Se inició la campaña electoral y poco después se levantó la limitación. Se levantó el 4 de febrero, antes por lo tanto.
And on the 4th of February,
Y
this
entonces el partido
case was presented to the Supreme Court.
presentó ante la Junta Electoral Central, ante el Tribunal Electoral Superior de España, una
And from the Electoral Board of Spain, this was presented to the Electoral Court of
que
Spain.
debemos pasar al siguiente ponente. Bueno, la Junta Electoral Central,
I will summarize.
que esa
The Central Board of Elections considered that
sancionada,
this decision was reasonable
tales
and did not harm any fundamental rights of the political party.
Agradecemos al magistrado Menéndez del Tribunal Supremo de España por estas interesantes reflexiones.
Thank you so much, Justice of the Supreme Court of Spain, for these interesting reflections. Next up, I will pass the microphone to Michael Mohalem, Professor of Law from the Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro.
I will speak English. And well, thank you, Ernesto, for the very provocative opening and many questions that you posed on the opening of this session. And let me also thank the organizers, Bawaslu and the Magistrate Justice Aban, Justice Monica Soto, that joined us. And let me thank you all watching us on Zoom or streaming. It's a great pleasure to be here. Everyone that at some point in time had organized an event such as this know how difficult it is. So I really appreciate the effort and the quality of this event. Thank you very much. It's much appreciated. The topic, the electoral judicial training, is technology the future? The question posed for us is not an easy one. We've been discussing for perhaps 7 or more intensely for the past 5 years. On one first instance, perhaps in the beginning of this network, many questions were being asked, and there was some insecurity, uncertainty of what was expecting us in terms of impacting the elections. And if we look throughout the 5 years, we can already see some developments, quite interesting developments. So we come from an uncertainty and a testing period to a moment where we can already assess some empirical experiences. Some legislation have been passed. A few elections have run through intense use of technology, through intense use of fake news, which demands the opposite, the regulation of the use of such technologies to make them spread. So I think we're in a better place now in relation to 5 years ago to discuss those elements. And thank you for putting the slides on. So in this brief 9 minutes, my idea is just to provoke some questions for our debate. And I'm lucky to observe that Justice Menendez, Jean-Philippe, a few other colleagues brought some of the topics that, some of the elements that I would like to discuss. So my idea for this presentation is, first, before we discuss whether technology is the future, we must assess which technology and to which transformation we're aiming. And in a second moment, who are the stakeholders? Who are those who must, which are the institutions or the actors within the electoral process that should be responsible or should be looked upon to implement those changes or to be responsible for the regulation of those technologies, or the regulation of the technology, of the implementation of a new technology. And finally, something that is quite important in this sense, on my view, which I'm calling the modulation of technology and trust. That's a balance that must be struck, especially in the current moment. So, to my first point, I'm not going to go through all. I will share the slide with you. But when we discuss technology, we could discuss in many directions. Thinking on elections, technology is part of our lives, right? We buy through internet. We use technology to date, to listen to music, to order food, to do a whole bunch of stuff. We live in the internet. It doesn't make sense anymore to speak of someone as someone navigating the internet. Internet is completely part of our lives full time. And elections, on the other hand, technology is entering in a slower path. And in some contexts, in some countries, in some realities, not all technology will be welcome, because not all technology will generate the necessary trust for it to become an element of instability instead of an element of strengthening the democratic system. So that's the way we should first consider. Technology in elections is not inexorable. It's not something that will necessarily happen in all systems, or at least it will take longer in some systems. There will be some asymmetry in the process of implementation. So we could look at administrations, justice administration, increasing transparency. Technology can be very helpful for that. Obviously, security and integrity, and I'm talking all kinds of security, cybersecurity, geographical security in relation to foreign attacks during elections. Limiting disinformation, as we spoke, since it's impossible to end disinformation, but at least limiting regulation able to limit, deciding on electoral hard cases. So how judges should be trained to understand a hard case involving the use of technology before their courts. And also technology to increase the voter turnout. We could speak of all those points, but we won't have time for that. So I will briefly highlight a couple of points on those three elements. But first, let me highlight the idea of the stakeholders. So not all technology, when we think on technology and elections, my understanding is that a lot of us will see as a responsibility of the state, or more generally the state, more specifically the Electoral Tribunal, the Electoral Committee, those responsible for the public representation of the responsibility for organizing an election. But not all the responsibility should be directed to the state or to the electoral court. In fact, when we think on those examples, and I think they illustrate what I want to make my point. When we think on limiting disinformation, when we want to, in terms of regulation, perhaps Parliament, not the courts, will be the best actor to act beforehand, before the election, simply because there will be probably some restriction on freedom of expression, some restriction of rights, perhaps. There will be an intrusion on private. Most legislation existing in the world will impose on social media and communication applications some sort of limitation and obligations that they wouldn't have otherwise, sometimes limiting their profit, but that's part of the democratic game. But they are actors. Those companies are necessary actors, and they must be involved in the process. In places where that worked out well, they were involved. And not only that, traditional media as well. Traditional media has been playing an important role, especially with coalitions of fact-checking. So they are important roles. So we must see. So when we're talking about this information before an election, courts are perhaps irrelevant actors. They might engage in the dialogue, but they are not the main actors. Whereas when we look at the hard cases, judges must be, like Fritz was pointing in this presentation, they must be trained and they must be able to identify the illegal use of technology, or the use of technology that might make an election unfair or biased toward one side and the other. And obviously, with the advance in technology, the investigative bodies, public prosecutor office, electoral prosecutor's office, or police, they must be equipped and trained to identify, for instance, deepfake. Deepfake is already a reality. You cannot tell if that certain candidate or party is responsible for certain manifestations that could lead to a consequence, electoral consequences. And finally, the idea of increasing the voter turnout or making the electoral process more friendly to voters. So you have different experiences. We spoke a lot today about electronic voting, the electronic ballot, and we are already experimenting the iVote, which is the online voting or internet voting. And I will highlight the experience of Estonia. It's a small country, so it's a good lab, but perhaps the experience is not replicable to most of our democracies. But those are interesting labs that allows us to test and to consider those experiences. I'm aware I'm reaching my time, so let me reach my last, which I think is crucial. So in implementing technology, the obvious idea is that one size does not fit all, and the implementation must be very careful with the idea of trust. That's the thermometer, and that's a process that it should be done carefully and slowly in implementation, considering not only cultural aspects but also testing people's trust. It does the difference between a very traditional system of voting in paper, where you paint your finger to prove that you already voted, to one using electronic ballots with the digital with your digital with your fingerprints digitalized, or even the Estonian model, you vote on your phone, on your computer through cryptography. The difference between those, it's simply is trust. The choice, if we're talking about countries that have access to technology, the choice between one of those systems will depend on trust. Evidently, considering the disponibility, the availability of technology. So when we think, I don't have time to go through all of them, but when we think, for instance, on the e-vote or iVote, the difference between distrust, implementation of change that will lead to distrust in the legal system, and changes that will generate more trust, the same process can generate both outcomes. And this is the process that, so part of the literature looking into this will suggest a progressive implementation process where you can show, for example, you can explore the aspects that are most positive in the e-vote, the electronic voting, for instance, efficiency, speed, the low risk of electoral fraud, as someone already highlighted today. Whereas if some aspects such as the difficulty in verifiability or auditability or algorithm testing, those are elements that still challenge the electronic voting and the iVote. Or disinformation as well, as I was saying, limiting some civil rights, freedom of expression, for instance, what could be considered limitation of freedom of expression. So regulations that go too far, they might generate a distrust in the rule. The regulation might be not well seen by certain groups. They might understand that those laws are limiting their rights. Whereas when regulation is capable of bringing civil society to play their role, and I recall very interestingly the morning session where Adi Aman, Ishal Suprandi, Shandi Watswala, apologies for my misspelling, but when you all raise the role of civil society and the importance of bringing the role of civil society as something as a part of essential as an essential part in democracy in election, I think that represents what part of my argument. So those actors should be part of the consideration of any regulation or technology implementation. And finally, not all empirical, the process of technology, sometimes they promise, they have an objective that sometimes is not, the empirical evidence doesn't show the same result. So, about Estonia, very interesting. So the online is with the purpose of increasing participation. Yes, thank you. To increase participation. But the result, the outcome, as you can see in the last few years, was not necessarily increasing in participation. The blue line is the total votes cast. So it remained relatively stable, but you had an increase, progressively increase in citizens using the online voting, reaching already close to 20%, an increase in 45% in the last few years. So those are still positive outcomes, despite the fact that it didn't reach the initial idea. So I want, for the sake of not passing even more of my time, I framed a few arguments that I explained before, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion. So thank you very much.
Gracias por estas interesantes reflexiones acerca de los medios de comunicación y el uso de las tecnologías.
Thank you so much for sharing your viewpoint on the effect of technology in elections. We will proceed to the second part of this panel, where we can discuss for up to 30 minutes, where we can answer 3 questions that are part of the program. And the panelists are very welcome to address these. We have 10 minutes to answer the first question. What cases in Asia could exemplify that a training favors the modernization from a sustainable perspective for internal and judicial processes? The panelists are welcome to answer this question. Please go ahead. Who wants to start?
Adelante, por favor, Fritz.
Please go ahead, Mr. Sirgar.
Yes, I have a question to Michael, because I'm not mistaken that Brazil still use the e-vote and the number is increasing. And compared to us, when we talk about e-voting, like everybody frightened, refuse not to talk about e-voting. And the number of the population, I think, is in Indonesia, from 270 million people, registered voter is 180 million people. And we're gonna vote in the one day only, from 7 a.m. until 1 p.m. And of course, the idea to have e-voting is always in the discussions. My question is, how you build the trust in Brazil? If I'm not mistaken, that you still use the e-vote and your number are also big. And what's building that trust? Thank you.
May I? Right. Fritz, my point about that, indeed, Brazil uses since the 90s 210 million citizens and 160-70 million voters, and the system is fully implemented for a couple of decades. And the system has a rate of approval or trust of above 82%, despite the fact that recently, and that's why I was even systems that are tested and reliable, and like the case of Brazil, that no relevant fraud accusation in the past few years. Nevertheless, even those systems are being challenged by those trying to weaken democracy, to challenge the integrity of electoral processes. This is a new, perhaps we can say, a new trend. The challenging to democracies go through the challenging of electoral processes everywhere. And so my point to that is the implementation was gradual in our case, and I think in many countries it does that way. You implement progressively in different parts, so you take a couple of electoral cycles to complete, to implement. But the point that I think is more important is that the willingness of those implementing the system to assess whether that's a correct, that route is generating trust. You must, when implementing technology, you must be able to step down if necessary. Netherlands, for instance, important democracy, adopted for, I think, for close to 10 years, the electronic vote, and decided to go back to paper, as other colleagues pointed similar examples. And I think that's that seems to be, if the society is not accepting, not ready for that, you have to be ready. So technology is not inexorable. We not necessarily need to be all of us with one system, electronic. Perhaps in the long run will be inevitable, but not with the current technology and with the current challenges to democracy. It's so what I was calling the idea of balancing technology with trust is this constant movement of checking if that's the system they're generating in all types of technology and regulation. You always, it's a living process in terms of keeping your democracy healthy and alive, especially against those attacking the democratic processes.
Muchas gracias, Fritz, y por supuesto a Michael por esta intervención.
Thank you very much, Fritz and Michael, sharing your experience on what is public trust in e-voting, shedding light on the case of Brazil. I would like to invite Segundo Menendez, Justice from the Supreme Court, to also comment.
Gracias. En España no
Thank you
se
very
ha
much.
implantado el voto electrónico.
In Spain, we do not have e-voting,
Ni tan siquiera se plantea como algo
and we don't even consider it as an urgent choice,
La
actually.
pregunta que quería trasladar,
The question that I would like to share
¿qué grado de garantía
is,
tiene el voto electrónico
what guarantees can e-voting provide, not only about the identity of the voter, but
sino sobre la libertad del votante?
also the freedom of the voter?
Realmente el nivel de garantía de la
Is
libertad del
the guarantee
voto
really
electrónico
of the freedom of the voter
es un nivel alto?
at a high level?
El nivel de garantía de la libertad a
Or
través de
is this guaranteed freedom
una cabina electoral en donde el elector elige
actually the polling booth where you can choose the voting slip
esto?
and the election in a traditional manner?
El problema de la libertad de la
Because if we analyze the freedom of choice through the voting,
no influenciada por ningún tipo de presión, de amenaza, esto es
there should never be any undue influence or pressure during voting. So we have to analyze how to make a free choice, whether it's digital or traditional.
Y mientras alguien más desea hacer uso
Thank you,
de hacer
Justice.
una pequeña reflexión,
Maybe there's someone else who wants to comment.
confrontar en
Otherwise, I will take this chance.
de Brasil con el caso de
It's interesting to see the different cases, Brazil and Spain.
de la voz por parte de Maestro
And
por favor.
I wanted to invite Professor Nguyen to also come.
Just to follow the intervention of our justice, Spanish justice, yeah, I would say it's not that the problem of freedom of vote. It's a problem of the secrecy of vote. It's quite completely different. So the whole our lessons for many years. Well, when I start doing the elections, we always say that we have to have a free, fair elections and the secrecy of elections. And as observers, we observe the secrecy. And then I have the feeling that the electronic vote cannot guarantee that when you send your vote in from your computer, somebody is not looking behind your back. So that I think that we have to also to discuss this one of the fundamental value of the secrecy of the vote. So I understand that the future will be in favor of the electronic vote. Because why? Because for the administrator, it will be a very important support. When they end the day of the vote, they already have the result. So that's something, if you were in the countryside and you don't have access to any other means, it's very important to have the electronic vote. But we cannot avoid the discussion about what is the fundamental of the vote, meaning one is the ritual of the vote. You remember in many countries, people would go to vote with their best dressed. In the third world country, the best dressed, vote in family, that's a ritual. And the second is the secrecy of the vote. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, maestro Don Nguyen. A continuación le cedo.
Thank you very much, Professor Nguyen. I will let Mr. Aman from International IDEA comment on this topic.
Thank you very much for providing me the opportunity, and thank you to the speakers for your enlightening thoughts and ideas. First of all, I would like to say that I've read your conclusions, Michael, and International IDEA has done a lot of studies and research on the introduction of electronic voting and also introduction of the adoption of technology in elections. And our findings are exactly the same, that trust is the ultimate prerequisite, and something that needs to be borne in mind whenever one has a plan to introduce technology. And this is often overlooked based on our observation. This is often overlooked because people tend to be lured by or attracted by the shininess and the prestige of having adopted a fancy technology. Yes, exactly. When ultimately it's all about making sure that elections are still conducted credibly and while being efficient, of course. My first question, and this can be to anyone in this room, speaking of technology, are the days already here or the present time when electoral dispute cases can be handled remotely, can be the proceedings can be conducted remotely, meaning when the parties in the dispute cannot be present in court, they can be allowed to present their evidence and also argue their case remotely. Is the technology there? Is the various procedures already there? And secondly, because of technology, there's also no need to travel in order to appear in court. Therefore, can electoral dispute cases then be resolved much quicker than they have been? My second question, and this is related to training, and it's quite simple as well, actually. And please forgive my ignorance. At the last session, we talked about models of electoral justice bodies. Now, at one end of the spectrum, we know that there are these Tribunal, Electoral, which are specifically established to hear and resolve electoral dispute cases. And the other end of the spectrum are regular courts that have been given the authority and competence to handle electoral dispute cases. Now, the first end of that spectrum, one would certainly expect that the justices presiding are already trained and knowledgeable in hearing electoral cases. But in the regular court end of the spectrum, the judges, and forgive my ignorance in this, they tend to be generalists. Is it necessary then for these judges to be provided specific training on electoral matters, or is it fair to assume that they are already competent? Thank you.
Muchas gracias por las preguntas. No sé si quieran responder.
Thank you very much for the questions. I will allow Jean-Philippe to please comment as well. Thank you. Go ahead.
Gracias. Sí, para compartir
Yes,
una breve experiencia.
to share a brief experience on this.
El voto electrónico.
I don't know if e-voting is the future or not, but I would like to shed some light on the French experience on e-voting and internet voting. E-voting is just how we know of it traditionally and how Mahalem commented on it, on how it is in Brazil.
El vantaje de este modo de votación es básicamente
the benefit of this kind of mechanism could be focused on the counting of the votes instead of doing it in the paper, doing it with a paper version. This kind of system allows a more immediate counting of the ballots.
Los dispositivos para votar son muy costosos y por eso fue adoptado en Francia en el 2000.
That's why in 2007 and 2008 in France, we decided to really evaluate if we could implement this further in France, because in addition to the cost of implementing it, it's also the cost of maintaining it. The need to buy many devices for each polling station. However, internet voting could be the future as well, because now in current society, it's such a connected society that many parts of the world are connected through internet. However, of course, there are segments within each country that are not as connected to internet. But the use of internet is quite widespread and is very important, and it's part of our everyday lives. 2 years, a hybrid meeting like this today would not have even been imaginable. But here we are. Now we have many meetings on Zoom, and we connect from across the globe. But I'm not completely convinced either that internet voting is the future as well,
del modo de votación, por lo menos no como
at least not
hacer que el voto por papel desaparece.
to the extent that we exclude traditional voting with ballot papers.
La posición al voto por internet.
So we should not abandon one system entirely for the other for two reasons. The first, for the same reason that Mr. Dong said, the secrecy of the vote is very important. And also the topic that we mentioned in the morning regarding the trust in this kind of system. I'm sure that internet can have a high level of trust, and maybe even more in 20 years or so that voters can truly trust in this mechanism and that their votes are not manipulated. Secondly, although internet is really truly important in our lives, and we are connected thanks to it, this kind of connection can also make us disconnected, ironically, because we need human connection. An electoral campaign cannot only be conducted online or via digital devices. We also need human touch and connection. Yes, we have a hybrid format and life, but we're also happy to see each other physically. And in a democratic society, it's exactly the same. To have this kind of relationship between human beings and trust, we need to see each other physically. So I'm not completely convinced that the physical voting or traditional voting with ballot papers should or would disappear completely in the future, and changing it to internet voting. This is not about, so this is a discussion of alpha and omega in terms of future voting. Thank you very much, Professor, for these reflections and for bringing up e-voting in your country. I had commented to you previously that we should discuss on each and every of these questions that are in the program. We're also addressing topics that are related to the second question, so I will move forward to this one. It is, what is the relationship between capacity training and relevant indicators for the success of a technological transition within tribunals and electoral authorities? I will now allow Justice Mónica Soto from the Electoral Tribunal of Mexico to please answer. Good afternoon. Thank you so much to our organizers for this event. Thank you so much for your welcoming and warmth. It's truly an honor to be for the first time in this country. I want to briefly do a reflection with regard to the use of technology in the strengthening of the democracies in the world. As my previous fellows have already commented, technology is very much present in everyday life, in our family lives, in the private lives, but also, of course, in our professional lives, and of course, part of our consolidation of democracies. This topic on e-voting will continue to be a discussion topic in the future, and I want to comment on what is public trust. Of course, this is a fundamental aspect for any election, and it has been a topic that has always been very interesting to discuss and very much present since before. I believe, and coincide with what has been commented by Professor Philippe, I believe that it is important to know and have also this kind of vision and understand reality in regard to context. Context is fundamental to really make a decision that makes sense with what really is favorable to access to justice, whether it is to a free and fair vote. This is part of the point where I think we cannot generalize completely, thinking that e-voting should be the only future. There are regions where not all the regions have this access to technology. There are rural regions that are as digitalized. So they have a greater challenge to really exercise their rights, and therefore technology is not exactly so accessible to them. So we need to think about this hybrid vision for the future, and including considering the perspective where this is optional. So e-voting could be optional to all the citizens. And then moving forward to the other topic with regard to the use of technologies in favor of access to electoral justice. This, of course, involves all of us here that work with electoral justice. I want to share with you my experience from my country, which is Mexico. Each of everyone, you all know that the pandemic, of course, speeded up the digitalization. We have new procedures that previously didn't exist because technology ended up being the solution to many of our new issues. And it facilitated our daily work within the tribunals. In Mexico, in the Electoral Tribunal, on the federal level, we also look towards the opportunity to administer electoral justice without being physically present in the high chamber, because of course we had to remain on distance because of the pandemic. So we proposed online trials, and we facilitated an app so that cases can be presented before the tribunal via this app or the website. I think that this has been something really good for us, and it has allowed us to really open more our doors of electoral justice and include citizens more. And on the other hand, we determined to have court hearings in a virtual or online manner. And this has allowed us to keep moving forward and never stop administering justice. So I was in the morning in the court meeting, so that's why I was not here in the morning. I was with my colleagues in a long and important meeting all the way from here. So I could continue with my responsibilities all the way from Indonesia. So the use of technology can really favor substantially democracies, but also the electoral justice bodies, so that they can contribute to the democratic systems. And I'm sure that we will all continue to really look for beneficial aspects of technology and how to implement them within our institutions. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Justice Soto Fregoso. I don't know if someone else would like to comment on something. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I would like to respond to two issues. First, that it is so that the ongoing judicial training is necessary. And the development of the jurisprudence of electoral justice, it's a recent phenomenon. So back home, we have identified the ultimate and essential need for ongoing judicial training. The fact that one has been a judge in a normal court dealing with civil and civil criminal matters does not of itself, of necessity, equip a person to adjudicate in an electoral dispute. So it is a recent phenomenon. So there is a definite need for ongoing judicial training. In South Africa, we have what is called the South African Judicial Education Institute, which has played a sterling role in that regard. Not only that, the use of technology has even made the need of further judicial training even more necessary. During the past pandemic, when there were a lot of restrictions on movement, we had to adapt our rules to include and involve the use of technology in the settlement of disputes, electoral disputes. And I must say, initially we were all apprehensive, but in the end, it actually proved to be an advantage because people were able to access justice, people were able to bring their issues before the court, and these were resolved successfully. There's always apprehension of doing something new, but in the end, the use of technology proved to be advantageous to us, and it enabled people access to our courts. So yes, there is a need for ongoing judicial training generally, and even more specifically in relation to technology. Thanks.
Muchas gracias. Agradecemos la participación a
Thank you so much.
presidente de la Corte Electoral.
Thank you so much, President Mba, for sharing your reflections
En su país.
on this topic.
Esta reflexión también nos lleva al contenido de la tercera pregunta.
This comment was really related to the last question, so this is a great transition. The question is, who are the stakeholders that should participate in the design, execution, and holding of trainings in this field? Anyone who wants to contribute? Please go ahead, Michael.
Well, I think I briefly had the opportunity to address some of those. So very, very briefly, in order to perhaps have other comments, but just to emphasize the idea that it's first necessary to understand who should be responsible for such tasks or training. So not always the judges, as I was pointing, the recent experience in